Let me just get this out of the way real quick. I hate this episode. And it's not because of some supreme plot hole or some contrived event, but because this is the least RWBY-esque episode we've ever gotten. With Monty dying, I knew there would be some changes, but who would have guessed they would have had pissed on his grave with this sheer amount of disrespect? Now, there are plenty of errors in the animation of just stupid plot crap to discuss, but that's just standard for RWBY. But what isn't standard is the fight scenes being this pants-on-head retarded. When you make me compliment an episode 8 from a previous season, you know you have some problems. I know this happens a lot in other shows, but I don't remember it happening in this series at all. At least during the actual fighting. Characters just stand around and watch their opponents do things. It's to the point where characters don't move until they're on screen, and this makes me so angry. The fighting in RWBY hasn't been great all the time, but for the most of the part, this isn't a thing. Here, characters have stupid and pointless reaction shots. They stand around while fighting each other. One guy just sits there and does nothing for like 50 seconds rather than doing anything to try to escape. I know a lot of people are not going to understand this little tangent because you will likely just say, yeah, the animation is shitty just like everything else, but that doesn't even matter. The only identity this show has ever had other than the generic anime thing was Monty's style of animation. This is something we have known for years. We've watched it grow as Monty developed and continued to put out great animation even if the stories became excessively dumb as they moved on. The same identity transferred over to RWBY, and the one fight scene we saw so far has really gutted every aspect of Monty out of it. I know this might seem like I'm overreacting a bit, but this is really fucked up. I've mocked Monty. I've called him stupid, unprofessional, lazy, sloppy, and incompetent, just to name a few. But this episode has insulted him so much more than I could have ever contemplated, even at the worst that Rooster Teeth was filing the takedowns. So enough of that rant. You can hear me bitch and moan about the awful writing and general mess-ups of the animation. So there's my short and aggressive, unexplained violent reaction to this episode. Fuck you, Carrie, and fuck you, Miles. So while my latest video waits while I file another counterclaim, and the whole Monty thing, I thought I might as well put up a video about the first episode. It's pretty bad outside of the Monty thing, so I think this will be fairly informative. So this starts out with RWBY talking to her mother, and she says some rather dumb things.
Together, we form Team RWBY. And yes, before you ask, that does cause a lot of confusion.
What confusion? No one will ever be talking to the team as a collective. They'll either be talking to the team leader, which is you, or they'll just be talking to you.
I still wonder why Ozpin let me into the school early. But, yeah, I guess he'll tell me one day.
Now, I'm willing to concede that this line might be just setting something up in the future. But I think it's fair to say that RWBY is not smart enough to pick up on this. So to her, the reason she isn't Beacon is because she kicked the crap out of the goons in the first episode. Whether or not Ozpin had ulterior motives really doesn't change that fact. But that means nothing when you see what I like to call the magic zone, because it's created by bullshit magic. So this was immediately noticeable to me, but her dad and the dog are not in the scene with her, for some retarded reason. But beyond the terrible compositing and the fact that her dad doesn't move even a little bit, there's another thing that's really off. It's the shadow, kids. First, Swine, or whatever his name is, has no shadow except for the noon shadow underneath him, while her dad has light hitting him from the side and yet still having the noon shadow. And RWBY has a light source hitting her from the back, kind of. Then, depending on where you're looking at, the sun is in several different locations at once. Light is beaming from behind the forest, which means the sun is setting behind the forest. The first tree has the sun in front of RWBY. The tree behind her dad is about 2 o'clock heading away from RWBY and further behind the forest. And the last tree has the sun in front of RWBY, but much farther to the right of her. Then, there's this single tree standing there out of place, and the light source is for high noon. And if you're not laughing at it, it cuts this picture where RWBY is literally walking through beams of light. She still has the high noon shadow, which if you know anything about shadows, you would know how perfect that is. And if for some reason you haven't got on board this train with me, if you do not have a sense of smug satisfaction from being better simply because you're not Rooster Teeth, it then pans up to show this massive star in the sky, and it tells us that all the lighting in the scene is beyond the realm of reason. People told me to do better than RWBY. It is now impossible to prove I haven't. So now we get into the meat of this episode and talk about why the tournament is rather retarded. First, the establishment of the event is just awful. We get 2 seasons softly hinting at this, and then we are now forced into it with the subtlety of an elephant humping a squirrel. From the original pacing of the show, I thought the tournament was going to take place around episode 6 or 7, and then episode 8 will happen. If I was writing the season, I would have probably had the tournament around episode 3. But never would I have guessed they wouldn't even build up the very first fight that Team RWBY was in, much less the entire tournament in general. but whatever. That's small potatoes compared to the pacing of these scenes and the animation. So the fight starts off with something I'd like to call "It's for the trailer," except for this is stupid and boring, so it wouldn't go in a trailer. These two teams are fighting in ways that don't make sense. They are literally taking turns to pose for the camera, and it's just painful to watch. And what immediately precedes this is a lesson in amateur writing 101. I don't know whose idea it was to explain how the tournament works in the middle of a fight, but I get the feeling he's also the one that thought the phrase, "for those of you who are just joining us," was clever and not an overused trope in TV and movies. Outside of being unrealistic, this is just a mild variance of "as you already know," and it's not how you write things. When creating a story, you have to inform the audience on a bunch of stuff, and the best practice for this is doing it in the most natural and subtle way you can. Breaking the fourth wall is normally not a good move, and it being this forced and unrealistic makes the mistake that much more noticeable. If I was forced to write this episode as it is now, I would scrap the RWBY part, have the fight in its entirety, and then have the group discuss the tournament as if they were trying to figure out what they have left to get through. And a little later on, they told us who they voted for. But if this scene was actually shown to us, most of this would have been explained to us without stopping the episode and telling us this information. And then for some reason, they cut away from the action of two characters dumping exposition to show us a bunch of mannequins sitting around staring at a TV screen. Now maybe I'm not getting the message, because this could be commentary on sedentary lifestyles and TV's involvement within that. Or it could be a bunch of lazy assholes who don't want to put the time and effort into animating when they're making a CG show. I don't know why they are so insistent on being as unoriginal as they possibly can be, but you don't have to show these pointless reaction shots. And if you absolutely have to establish that people all over the world will be watching this and you don't want to put the effort into it to not make it look awful, just make a camera and show it filming the event. In a world where there are cameras everywhere, I think we can assume that every house has a TV. And then we have the actual fight, and boy are we back in this topic again. At a passing glance, it might not seem all that bad, and you might even miss it, but your balls didn't. People having conversations in the middle of fights. People fighting over screen time rather than each other. Whatever this stupid scene is, why animate a fight when people can just stand around? And this, in which Blake has to bicycle kick around a mountain of ice just to out of bounds a girl. And that foot. Now I know I let a lot of these animation errors go, but normally they try to hide them at least a little bit. That is front and center and impossible to ignore. Then her foot goes through the floor. GG, Rooster Teeth. GG.
We did it?
Why did she say that in the manner she said it? Again, Yang just power slammed 3 guys into the side of a hill in a very poorly animated manner. Of course you did it. So to praise this episode one of the 2 times I need to, this transition is great. But then for some reason Weiss decides to be a bitch. And not facetious. People do not speak like robots. I am hungry. Get me food. So I almost like the dialogue here because it's Ruby and Blake saying they want food without directly saying it, and then Weiss was being a condescending dick. The part that really bothers me though is that there is no point to any of this. I would say it's a setup to a punchline, but this is just a pointless moment to pad out the episode. This happens a few times.
How can they be so happy all the time?
She's just a bad actor. But in real life and in the show, that line read was really bad.
Did you at least get what we want?
It's the heiress and the bimbo.
Alright. At least now we know who we're working with.
No! No! How can you so easily ruin that which I love? I get the fact that Monty died, so if there was a time to change the cast, now would be it. But damn, did you screw this one up. Now, don't take this the wrong way. Yuri Lowenthal might be my favorite male voice actor, but damn, he was a bad choice. Whoever voiced this guy the first time played him as a massive asshole because that's what he was. This is not an asshole. This is more of a mentally retarded, maybe a criminal person. Now, I, along with a bunch of other people, have laughed at the fact that Vic is playing Crow, but this shouldn't have happened. Now, I hate to be pessimistic about this, but I get the feeling that this change was just to make RWBY more marketable. This is not Yuri's fault. He was just poorly casted. This entire thing undermines the tangible problem with the reason for this scene, which is, why did they need to get this information from Team RWBY? But this just goes to show how irrelevant some of these issues can be in the face of awesome or awful things. Alright, this scene starts off like a normal RWBY scene. Then we hit a dumb moment with Weiss's card not working. Ignoring the fact that you pay after you've eaten, ignoring the fact that anyone else could have paid, and even ignoring the fact that unless mines and banks are the same thing in the world of Remnant, making her card not even a functional debit or credit card, maybe this is the reason why your dad called you. There are numerous reasons why your card would stop working. Your dad changed banks. The format of the card has been changed. The card just expired and you didn't notice it. Or maybe it was the fact that you got your hands on sensitive information and your dad wants to know why, and you're not answering his phone calls. Then we get another 70s cleaning montage. This time without the funky music, because why take a barely enjoyable aspect of a horrible thing to its next iteration? Yeah, this is just wasting time, and I find it fairly offensive. Then, skipping ahead through some stuff I could talk about, but it's not really that bad, we have Cinder saying this.
Oh, come now. Even if you know how a story ends, that doesn't make it any less fun to watch.
Cinder has said some of the dumbest stuff in the vain hopes of being dark and mysterious. This is the dumbest of them all. Now, there are some occasions in which knowing the ending of a movie won't affect it, like Die Hard. That's a dumb action movie where the hero in the end saves the day, and I love it every time I watch it. But even in that situation, there is still a clear difference between the first viewing and other viewings. And this isn't all that common. Most movies, TV shows, and books are not as good if the ending is spoiled for you. And yes, I know she's alluding to her ultimate evil plan and her knowing Pierre's ability, but I don't care. So that's the first episode of RWBY. I'm hoping this continues to get worse. Why be bad when you can be the worst bit of media I have ever had the pleasure of consuming? Also, Rooster Teeth, we both know you've already viewed my mega review. Stop being fascist dicks and just let my video go through. It's making you look really, really bad.